Thank you. Welcome to the Edinburgh International Book Festival. We're here as part of the Thought Exercises, which is a series that digs deep into the urgent issues of our time. I'm Susan Murray, and I'm director of the David Hume Institute, based here in Edinburgh. And I think I was picked to chair this session because, as well as loving data, we do a quarterly survey which asks people about what they think about their lives and the economy in Scotland. And we love thoughtful conversations, so I'm delighted you've joined us today to spend time with prolific author David Dorling, who is Professor of Human Geography from the University of Oxford. And we're going to be discussing his latest book, The Next Crisis, What We Think About the Future. Now, talking to Danny in advance, this is his 59th book, which is some achievement. So at the end, we'll also finish about what his 60th book will be, just to give you an insight, because he's already got that underway. This book unpacks some polling data to reveal global crisis and how often they're very different from what are in the headlines. And I suspect we might also touch on 7 Children, which was his 58th book, although there was another one last year as well. Which one's 58 and which one's 57?
That's 57.
Okay.
Yeah,
So 7 Children is an eye-opening investigation into childhood inequality in post-pandemic Britain. Now, before Danny became an academic, he was employed as a children's play worker in summer play schemes, and he learned the ethos of preschool education, and the underlying rationale was playing and learning for living. So I think we'll also have some fun today as he tries not to forget this play in the work he does. You can read more about him on his website, dannydorling.org. Now, before we start, just to confirm, we're not expecting any fire alarms, so if one goes off, please do go to the nearest exit and the venue staff will give you instructions. And we've also got some ground rules because this session is a little bit different from some of the others in the book festival, where the larger events you're kind of talked at and you might get a chance to ask a question at the end. We've got 90 minutes together and it's a thought exercise, so you have to do some work too. There will be questions and there will be interactions, and we want you to leave having learnt something new, challenged your own assumptions, or spoken to someone you didn't know before. And the second rule is please be respectful of others, whether it's listening to views that might be different from your own, putting your phone on silent, or avoiding flash photography. Please remember your manners. If you wish to share anything of the event on social media, do it discreetly so as not to bother other members of the audience. And after the event, Danny will be doing a book signing, so there's another chance to catch a word with Danny at the end, just on the table over there. And finally, my last few instructions I have to give you. If there is any jargon or acronyms or a term that you do not know, please just pipe up and say, because you're probably not the only one that's wondering that. And we want to make sure that everyone in the audience understands everything that we're talking about. So firstly, to help Danny and I know and to warm you up, I'd quite like to know who's in the room and where you're from. So if ever you've been to the Tattoo, they get the audience to shout out when they read through a list of places. So first of all, I'd like to know, if you put your hands up, how many people are from Edinburgh? Fantastic. And elsewhere in Scotland? Fantastic. Elsewhere in the UK? Brilliant. Elsewhere in Europe? Ooh. America? Fantastic. Very welcome. And the rest of the world? Goodness. And I'm also very interested to know how many people in the room have more than one passport for a country. Goodness. Oh, interesting. And you'll find out why that's interesting later on. And finally, Danny would be particularly interested to know, just at the beginning, which crisis do you think is front of your mind at the moment facing the world and the future? If you want to sort of shout out some of the things that are front of your mind, then do.
Climate, low birth rates, inequality, democracy.
Goodness, right. So there's quite a range there, Danny, for you to think about. So do you want to start by telling us about the book and why did you write it?
Yeah, it's really interesting that the fastest shout and the loudest demo is climate. And that was one of the reasons I wrote the book. I'm addicted to writing books. I don't like writing academic papers. You have to write something if you're an academic, so I write books. And I teach students. I teach students in the Department of Geography and the Environment. It's a very large department. We have about almost 500 staff in Oxford, and we have climate change centres. And the major preoccupation of our students is climate change as the biggest crisis that they see. And so it's interesting that it's a major preoccupation of you here, because you are a different age group to the students. And the climate is incredibly important, but it isn't the major crisis as far as most people in the world are concerned when they're asked. And I should caveat it. We have about 8 billion people in the world. I'm only talking about half of them, the 4 billion who were ever surveyed, if you like, the world's middle class. And the world's middle class, have between $8,000 a year and $100,000. But these are the better off folk in the world, or the better off folk in Britain. And when we ask them what is on their minds, what they worry about most in the world, climate used to rank about 6 or 7, and it's dropping to 8. It's fatigue. It's there, but it's not their major preoccupation. And in Britain, and when you run these surveys in Scotland. The biggest preoccupation changes over time. I'm using the Ipsos-Mori data, which I think Ipsos do the nicest surveys in the world. I think they're better than YouGov, but and it changes. About 15 years ago, the biggest worry in the world was unemployment. This is the worry of the world's middle class. It's currently number 2 in the world. And I can remember being shocked when I saw that. And I suddenly realised how immensely, I know I'm privileged, but the degree of it, I work in a university where it's very hard to sack academics, and where the financial fear of being sacked is very low. I've worked in 4 other universities in Britain. This is the first time in my life I've actually worked in a university where I haven't worried about my own job. In the other universities I've worked in, I've worried. Most academics in Britain are worried about unemployment. But it's quite possible to work in an industry plagued by unemployment, or the fear of it, and not worry. So my preoccupation in this book is the gap between the crises that people are concerned about and tell you that they are, and the crises that the elite are more concerned about, and why there's a difference. And to go back onto unemployment again, the majority of people who are worried about unemployment are employed. Their fear is that not always happening. Or students who are, in some cases, utterly petrified that they're not going to get a job, or a goodish job. And it concerns me if we only worry about one thing. And I think it also shows a disregard for other people's concerns and why climate is dropping. Because it's almost as if you keep on going about the climate when I'm having to deal with this. Do you want to guess what number 1 in the world is, by the way? The number 1 worry now. Wasn't the number 1 worry 15 years ago? Yeah. It's cost of living, hunger, inequality and poverty. Now with Mori, inequality and poverty and cost of living are measured separately, and they're numbers 1 and 2. I've combined them, right? So, and that's above unemployment. And this is in the majority of countries in the world that are surveyed, including the Chinese Academy of Science, which does its own survey for China. Mori do India. Once you've got those 2 in a couple of countries in Africa and some of South America, most of Europe, and you've got most of the world. I think work of academics, not me, older colleagues writing on inequality and poverty for 2 decades now, have actually risen an understanding around the world about how important this is. And then, of course, the pandemic and the cost of living crisis coming in has helped sharpen it. But it was there as number 1 before the pandemic and the cost of living crisis now. So number 1 is not having enough money. Number 2 is not being needed, not having a job. And more distant things, more far away things in time, like harder to understand things, are lower. And if you don't take these big preoccupations seriously, I don't think people are going to take your preoccupations seriously. And lastly, I go on, I told you too long. The majority of university students, even across Europe, think it's game over on climate. It's not just a crisis, it's a crisis so bad that they really believe the 12 years to save the world, it's gone. And if you have that degree of fatalism, you're in a way doomed anyway. And I wanted to try and put these things more in a perspective of, can we order what the big worries are? How much damage are they each causing? And then, of course, what can you do about them at the end? Not that I'm omnipresent and I can solve all the world's problems, but what I can do is present you with things in a different order to what you might think about. I was at a talk yesterday by Ferdiotto and Tony Juniper about climate and the floods and the increasing weather events. And through my head was something in, I think, chapter 6 of this book, where I record the number of people who've died every decade since the 1950s in climate-related events, as recorded by a UN body. In the 1950s, it was about 77 people died for every million alive in the world due to floods, due to storms, and so on. 77 million. 77 per million. It's come down every decade. In the 2020s so far, it's 1 person per million. We have worse floods, we have far more erratic climate, but only 1 person dies in every million a year from these in the world, because of other things going on, because of mobile phones, because we learn. When 1,600 people die in Pakistan because a third of the country is flooded, one of the remarkable things is it's 1,600 people as opposed. And so it is terrible that the world is getting warmer and we don't know what's going to happen and how warm, and it's erratic. But we should at least take some joy in the fact that we've managed to get that down, and not forget that for every million people in the world, you have thousands upon thousands dying every year of poverty and hunger and starvation, and you're worrying about 1 in a million. It's perspective. It's how do you frame it, and the fact that often the solutions to the thing you're worrying about are the same solutions to the thing which is affecting far, far more people.
So all the way through the book, you kind of challenge us to think about the difference between the perceived risk and the actual risk. And I really like that, but it really comes home, given the audience's interest in climate change, when you're looking at the IPCC reports and unpicking some of the language. And I wonder if you just want to explore that idea of it's how you communicate the numbers that really makes a big difference to how people understand.
I was really worried my colleagues would get very annoyed with me about this book, because the largest group of my colleagues in my department are climate change scientists, about 100 of them. And the lead author for the Paris report is in my department. Partly his name is Alan, so it comes first alphabetically. But he's Mr. 1.5 degrees. And Oxford, I'm upper middle class Oxford, right? The major concern is climate. And I'm sitting in a department of the environment with a climate change centre with a very large computer cluster which overheats endlessly trying to do climate change models, which is slightly annoying if they don't make the email work. But anyway, and a lot of my colleagues contribute to IPCC reports, and they're huge. I mean, there can be 14,000 pages, but you can read the summaries and so on. I got very annoyed a few years ago about all the worries about climate migrants. If you might remember, we were being told there were going to be, at one point, 1 in 8 of the world's population was about to become a climate migrant. That was the most extreme one. And then there were 30 million, 60 million. All these wars were being caused by the climate changing in Syria and whatever. You still hear that sometimes. There's a map of all the wars since 1989 in this book, and they are not about climate. You look at the map of who's dying. The short answer is don't be in Rwanda, and then don't be Muslim if you want to see. And most of the wars in the world concern the global powers and where they want to fight over. It's not because there was a drought somewhere that it started. It's because these big powers and the people who wanted to sell weapons are selling weapons. IPCC now have downgraded their concerns about climate migrants way down. And you can see that somebody was worried, but there was no evidence, and then the evidence of no evidence became stronger and stronger. IPCC qualify all their statements with a degree of certainty. How certain are they about them? And so I added these up to see. And one remarkable thing is that they are less certain about the past, about what has happened. There's more disagreement about the past than there is about their statements about the future. And it's not, in some ways it's funny, in some it's really revealing. And it's brilliant that they tried to qualify everything. Now, we don't know about the past. We think we know about the past. Most of the global books I've written about demography. And it was wonderful to me watching at what point China quietly admitted about the Great Famine at the end of the 50s in China, and the UN was able to take 50 million people off. Right? And in the last 10 years, I've watched the world population record being corrected to something that's more true. Right? We don't actually necessarily, but at least we know we can disagree about our views about what's just happened. There's a need, if you're part of the climate change community, for unanimity for political reasons, to say we are sure things are going to happen. But the problem is it's a bit too much surety, particularly given that the models have a big Emabad. So it could be much worse than is predicted. And that's absolutely terrifying. We don't tend to talk about that very much. I think in a way because it isn't helpful to talk about supposing we've got it wrong and it's going to go like this, rather than to 1.5 to 2.5. I could go on and on about, we don't know what's going to happen. We do know that climate change is very, very, very bad. We know we cause it. One of those books was called Slow Down. I measured many, many things. Everything in the world is slowing down, apart from number of university graduates, but that's going to slow down. It's currently about something like 45%. It's incredible. Of people who've gone to university at some point below age 30 in the world. Obviously, it has to slow down. Then the three other things that are accelerating are air flights, that they're accelerating to 2019. Okay. Something nice happened at the end of 2019, 2020. And see if you don't like air flights. Show that the world can work without them. Carbon emissions, not just rising, but accelerating. You know, if you really want to get angry, it's that. And temperature, not just rising, but the rise getting slightly faster each decade than before. So that's terrifying. But everything else slowing down. But our ability to adapt, to move, to cope is increasing. I'll give you one last one about climate. You're endlessly told that this is affecting the world's poorest people the most, and will affect the world's poorest people the most. The majority of recorded deaths attributed to things as a result of climate change are heatwave deaths. And the majority of heatwave deaths that are recorded are in rich countries in the world. Now, it could be that the data for India is really, really bad. But India's the question of why on earth are we not getting more deaths in India, given we know just how hot it is summers in India. But the bulk are people across Europe in the 2003-4, if you remember that one. North America, Russia. And they're old. They're in their late 80s or 90s. Right? It's going to be us. Right? The working class of Edinburgh ain't going to live long enough to be at the high risk of dying in a heat wave in future. And I think it's at least useful to mention these. Or I'll give you an equivalent. You're constantly told to switch that COVID affected the poor more than the rich. And the death rate was about 4 times higher if you were working class as towards middle class. Corrected for age. Now this is rather like working out the chance of going bald corrected for age. Right? The key risk factor for going bald is getting older. If you correct for age, you might find all kind of interesting things, but it's not that interesting. The key risk factor for dying of COVID, unlike any other disease, is age. It's exponential. We lost 15% of all our men in the UK aged 90 and above directly to the seas. 15%, 1 in 6. And 10% of all women died from COVID. Right, that was the bulk of the deaths in the pandemic were to people over 90. Now, who gets to be 90 and above in the UK? Okay, you know about the 10 years, 20 years of life expectancy difference? COVID predominantly killed the well-off in this country. It sounds controversial to say that, but it was obvious, right? These were the people in care homes at that age. They tended to actually still own a big detached house. We got a house price boom and a flee to the countryside because there was suddenly a lot of empty houses in the countryside at a high price. I'm just want to give you an idea of, by doing something like correct for age, which is what ONS did with the COVID stats, then to something very laudable and explain that the working class were 4 times more likely to die of COVID, you miss the key thing. And the key thing is politically powerful because it tells people from the classes with power why you really want to worry about this again and do a better job, because it'll be you or your parents. Similar to why we bothered about cholera in the 1850s, because the affluent thought they were going to die of it. And these is framing, endlessly looking at it and saying, is it helpful that we're looking at it in this way? If it is us who are going to be most directly, personally affected by climate change, because we're not going to be able to cope with the hot summers to come in our relatively nice retirements when we can come to book festivals and do other things, right? Then rather than thinking I'm really helping those people on that small Pacific island by doing my recycling, you can think actually how I vote matters for me, myself, and for my family and friends who are going to live to an age that means that climate change is going to affect them. I don't know. It's, you know, is that useful to think about things in that way?
So just before we come to the audience, there's another story you tell in the book that's also about perception of data. And it made me think about the fact that in the UK, the average age of maths ability is somewhere around a 9-year-old. So for those of you from Scotland, that's P5. And are there any Radio 4 listeners in the room? A few. I thought there might be. And does anyone listen to More or Less with Tim Harford? Okay, so I really like that throw. I like the premise of, is it a big or a small number? Is that really big? I would like that. But I remember driving one day, I think I was taking my kids somewhere, and I remember hearing Tim do a segment on the radio and thinking, that doesn't sound right. But busy doing what you're doing, I didn't do anything. I didn't go home and look it up and complain. But Danny tracked the complaints to that and the stories in the book. Do you want to share that with us? I think the audience would be interested in that.
Yeah, this is about inequality, and most of what I work on is inequality in Britain. And the More or Less story was about inequality falling. And Tim was saying income inequality in Britain has fallen since 1996. Now, it's a statistic I can remember because almost every Chancellor's speech at a budget since 2010, when the coalition came in, and then particularly since 2015 with the Conservative administration and Osborne, there was a line in every Chancellor's speech which was about inequality falling, which is really annoying if what you do is talk about income inequality and about it getting bigger. And I think it's somebody playing a game in the Treasury. And the measure, and people are better at maths, by the way, and education in Scotland than England, have been for centuries and still are. The measure that ONS used, but they use many measures, but this is a particularly, I think, stupid measure, is the ratio between the median income of the top quintile and the bottom quintile of adults, right? And that ratio of the so you've got 5 quintiles. You take the top quintile, 20% of the population, and you take the middle person, right? On 1 to 100, that's person 90. From the bottom fifth of the adults, you take the middle person, that's person 10 out of 100. And that ratio had gone down from something like 6.1 in 1996, down a little bit to 5 point whatever, and had dropped steadily. So income inequality is falling. What that measure obviously misses is the top 10%. Almost certainly a majority of you are in that, along with us. The top 10% take 40% of all income. So you miss them out. And the bottom 10%, who are the only group who contain anybody who's destitute or whatever. And if you take out this 20% of the population, the best off 10th and the poorest 10th, then yes, really interestingly, there's been a slight coming together in the middle. But that middle has lost out because us top 10 have taken more and more over time. And the fascinating thing was that the BBC, I didn't actually complain. I looked at the complaints and then saw as they eventually answered them, they used to put it all up on the web. The BBC judged that the complaint was wrong. It's not malicious. I honestly don't think that this part of the BBC, I have my conspiracy theories about, I think the BBC really tried to be neutral. But being neutral on the most unequal country in Europe and one of the most right-wing countries in Europe means you have to be far right. But they're very neutral. And really believe they're neutral and don't know that we're weird now. But the fact that they couldn't get it, the audience members, and the fact that Tim Hartford, who's not slow, but thought this was a perfectly reasonable thing to do, because when you look at statistical distribution, it's sensible to leave out the outliers. Right? That's not what income inequality is about. It's all about the outliers. Right? Think about 784 society. Can you remember 784? Yeah. Okay. And there was a time when we were more literal. You could actually call a theatre group 784, and people would go to it. Like, it's about the distribution of wealth in Scotland. I don't know. And so you can despair about this, but you can also think it is possible to get into a situation of a country where your public realm, your ability to discuss things is so denuded, as opposed to, say, the public newspapers of Finland or Germany, and what they talk about, that we end up where we are, and it's circular, because we get worse and worse. And we think we're ever so clever with the brightest universities on the planet, right? And it's just bad. And we can look to the US if you want to see how bad it can get, about this kind of level of ignorance and not understanding. But we should just not do that. And I may have said it in too cruel and unkind a way, right? But it would be great if Tim Hartford would at one point, in more or less, spend a whole half an hour going through this thing and say, I did get it wrong. Let's look at it. It's not all easy. There's wealth as well. There's other things. And it'd be good for him and it'd be good for everybody to do that, rather than say, which I think is the current more or less stance, we do such a good job of uncovering stupidity that if we occasionally get it wrong, well, we're the harbingers of truth. But it really matters to me that is the story. Things have been getting better, they tell you, at a time when they'd be getting worse. And by the way, if you're feeling a bit annoyed that I've put most of you in the 10%, the majority of the income of the 10% is taken by the top 1%. So you're still badly done by. And even if you're in the top 1%, which is now, if you're on your own, you're not bad. If you're getting 200 grand a year, I won't ask the person in this room getting 200 grand a year that they are. Even if you're in that top 1%, the bottom half of that top 1% has been doing worse and worse compared to the top half. But this creates a degree of kind of anxiety and fear. It's partly why private school fees can go up and up and up. But why people feel that it's harder and harder to pay them, because they're not going up as much. And then why it's terrible they're being charged VAT. And we're living in increasingly parallel worlds as your inequality rises and rises and rises, and not understanding each other.
Thank you for going into that. So just because this is a thought exercise, if there is anyone that wants to take an action out of that, to write to Tim Hartford and ask him to look at it again, please do. Danny's quite happy to be a guest on the show, I would imagine.
Yeah, I'll tell you the thing I've never done, but it's getting closest to it with this room layout. Or just to think about it, if you imagine, we won't do this, I promise, but if you imagine we get you to quietly whisper to your neighbours either side of you what your highest salary ever was, which might be now, but maybe when you're working, and just quietly say, what was it, to the nearest £1,000, and then swap seats so that the person with the higher income goes on that side. And then we'll do it 15 times. You will have the income distribution in the room will be here. And the fact that even talking about that, because it really matters, is I hope one point in my life I can do that somewhere.
We'll probably have to sign a disclaimer or something before you go in the room. Anyway, I now want to come to the room. I think Danny's brain is a bit like a walking encyclopedia because he holds so much data in there. So I think there are so many subjects covered in this book. I'm quite happy to go anywhere and leave it loose. There were a lot of passionate people saying things really strongly. So who wants to come in with a question or a comment on what you've heard so far? Oh, fantastic. Right, do you want to take them singly or in groups?
Let's take them singly at first.
Okay,
yeah.
Let's start on the far side.
And it was 3 men.
It was 3 white men, so come on, women. I want you next.
How do you feel about artificial intelligence? Because when you go on the internet, it's getting to the stage where you could be looking at something that's a news article or a picture. It's not necessarily that can be computer generated. I think, it's more to do with the way I was brought up. Science programs like QED as far as well were born with robots. Robots were in the car industry before I joined the job market. What's your opinion on artificial intelligence?
Okay, my editor made me put bits on artificial intelligence in the book because I didn't want to. Because as yet, so I have a particular cynicism which is all about me and not useful. Which is the first artificial intelligence I came across was John Conway's Game of Life, which was invented in 1968. Which, if you won't know it, but it created a game which could reprogram itself. It's a real thing. I did a PhD in 1989 when my supervisor was programming neural networks in Fortran, amazingly, and stupid language to program them in. And artificial intelligence in 1989 could emulate a sea slug. Then we got Julian Bisag's paper on analysing dirty pictures. It was a joke in statistics, but the recognition of number plates. And then we got the translation using the European Parliament translators and again neural networks. So I'm a computer geek who learnt to program before he learnt to properly write, and it's been there for a long time for me. I now have to deal with students who are constantly writing that they have AI skills, which means that they can do a very small linear regression. But they call everything AI. I'm cynical that this is as big a leap forward as people say. I read a number of books to try, and the most interesting one was Steve Wolfram's book, which is very short. It's only about less than 100 pages. And right at the end, he has this bit where he goes, it's not going to scale up. It doesn't actually, the way it works is that just by doubling or tripling the computer power, you're not going to get something that different to what we've got now, which I think might be partly why they're running so hard with what we got now to try and get it out, to try to get you addicted to their system for life, ideally. There's a danger with this cynical approach. I could be wrong to the point where suddenly the AI is in charge and we're the subspecies. Right? That is entirely possible. But in general, technological changes have been beneficial. It's been great that people haven't been weaving with their fingers, that we've got looms. It's wonderful that in my home city of Oxford, it is machines that make the books and not men, make the cars and not men anymore. And it's wonderful that my colleagues can no longer set tutorial essays where you're expected to write a banal middle-of-the-road answer and talk about it with your tutor every week, because that's just what AI does. It can produce an Oxford tutorial essay, which is the most stupid thing. Sorry, I really hate the tutorial system. And it doesn't, it's like a clever Google search at the moment. I do worry. I worry about people forming relationships with their AI friends. I worry about that.
Well,
yeah.
It wasn't that, it's just I remember the BBC program, the BBC Two program, Nature, which was narrated by Michael Bell. And the way to counteract that kind of thing is you have to have a documentary from the television age, if you understand it, to protect yourself from artificial intelligence. That's how I would see it.
Yeah, we should be immensely suspicious about the amount of money and investment going in at the moment, and what is it they're trying to do, how they're trying to get you. For advertising, for getting in your mind, for getting you addicted to something that will help you work out, what do I do when my washing machine doesn't breaks, and so on. But it is in effect the advertising industry trying to get you in immensely computer inefficient ways to do this. But I really could be wrong. All these predictions about how many jobs are going to go, it just seems like deja vu from every other prediction of it. Sorry, should we do the next one?
I wanted to hear more about what you had to say about climate migration.
Yeah.
And how do you distinguish between climate migration and economic migration? Which is the obvious one that we all talk about.
Yeah. So the vast bulk of migration in the world is local. It's still pretty local. It might be cross-border, but it's local. And the vast bulk of refugees are local, and they are a minority. The amount of global migration was quite high 100 years ago. We had no passports, apart from the internal passports in Russia. You know, we forget we were a world without passports. We here in the UK were a mass emigration nation. We spawned ourselves, around the planet and took over. So the current rates of migration were not particularly high and have really come down with some controls and so on. Not for the UK at the moment with the 500,000 net coming in, but the amount globally. It's economic opportunity mainly that people do try to go. They always have done. Glasgow's biggest problem, not too far about this, was when its population halved because people stopped coming for 40 years. We forget, the worst thing that can happen to your area is that people stop coming. The obvious area that people in the world should be leaving due to climate change is the Middle East, where there isn't enough water, which is the area that's being fought over desperately. So it's kind of slightly ridiculous if you look at it from that point of view. Our species are moving, so we no longer in this country try to protect individual species in particular places. We realise that they will die if they try to stay where they are. They're moving northwards. And we are a species that is able to move a bit, but there is as yet very, very little evidence of any migration away from areas that have become more arid that would make sense. It's economic, and it's countries like Canada, who've had an incredible economic boom because they've been incredibly welcoming, and then now they have a political issue. Countries like Germany, which were doing badly until they let in 1.5 million Syrians, and then that helped. But they've still hit their population peak forever. Germany is never going to have the population it has in 2024 again. Migration is a natural thing that human beings have always done. We're in a city built for migration. 140 years ago, the largest migration in the world was the gold rushes to California, but the second largest was the Welsh valleys to mine from Russia and places that people, it's a thing people do, and it sorts us out. We also do it rather like a billiard ball table. We're like atoms in a jar. We go all over the place at an incredible rate, and we settle where there's a place for us to settle, and we leave where there isn't. I've forgotten the numbers of people who come in and out of Heathrow every 3 days. That's over 1 million. So this is something that people do. You can try and control it. And all that happens if you try and control it is you get people from somewhere else, which is we've helped demonstrate this with Brexit. and you get different people. So we did Brexit. We made it much harder for people from the mainland to come here. And people from other places have come here in greater numbers than the European mainland. We made it harder for our young people to go to the mainland, so they go to other places. And if we tank economically, they're going to go. It's just that they won't go to France. They're going to go somewhere else. And they won't even think they're going. They're just going away on a holiday. But they'll meet somebody, might fall in love, and there's a job opportunity there, and there isn't here. And that's how migration works. And one of the saddest things talking about migration was we just produced an atlas, me and my friend Bethan, for the BBC, an atlas of migrants. And I was doing Radio Doncaster. And the story just before Radio Doncaster Live was how the last pit around Doncaster had just closed. Right, it was a pretty depressing story. And Doncaster was doing particularly badly when we did this. This is a couple of decades ago. And the radio presenter turned to me and said, "So what are all these Germans doing in Doncaster?" And I'd realised the presenter had actually looked up the atlas and worked out, they rarely do this. And the truth was, and I was trying to work out how the hell do I, with my posh southern accent on local radio in Doncaster, explain the truth. And it was slightly like, what the hell are all these Germans doing here? This is terrible. I was trying to explain, well, Doncaster was one of those areas which had a high recruitment to the army. And the Army of the Rhine, our army, occupying Germany, had children in Germany, and those children are born in Germany. They're very British children, the sons and daughters of squaddies in Doncaster. But the fact that your largest immigrant group in Doncaster is German tells you that nobody else comes, right? And that things have been really bad in Doncaster. And it's fascinating when you look at the Brexit referendum, the highest correlation was immigration. The fewest immigrants you got, the more you voted to leave. Like, when people don't come, things are really, really bad in your area. And I feel I can say this, I was born in a town, my friends at the back, I was born in a town that has been more altered by migration, I think, than almost any other, where the migrants came, mostly from England, displaced local people, made the house prices really high. I mean, it's really hard to employ anybody who can make your email work in a department, which is Oxford. But I don't dislike migrants, despite the fact that they've come and met my town and gentrified it. That's how it works. But it'd be better to plan for it and to think, if you're a city like Oxford, do you really want to stay at 160,000 people and have a green belt that's just a mile from the centre of your city and have golf courses? And what are you playing at? Rather than, you're really lucky if people come. And when they stop coming to the areas they stop coming, it's a problem. And we're entering a world in which fewer and fewer people are being born and will be able to come. And we get agitated about people who manage to get into a dinghy and people who've managed to get across the Sahel on an entrance test far harder than any entrance test you can devise for any university degree anywhere. And how on earth, and it gets back to that more or less question, how on earth did we get into a position where we become paranoid about 11-metre inflatable dinghies? How on earth did that happen? When we've had less than 2 children per couple since the late 1960s. It's just, and we've got the sunk infrastructure, we built the sewer systems, we've got an island which can house enough people, and we haven't been having these people, and we're not going to have them. And you're worried about people coming? I'm very happy to talk about this.
Are there any more questions related to wrong-headedness? Are we asking the right questions? There's pressure now on you to ask the right questions. I can see lots of hands going up. So, can we take both the ones in the back row, and then we'll come over.
I wonder if you widen the lens away from the human focus. Is there a correlation across species?
With that, okay, species, previous book, that the best data for species is the extinction data, the best I've been able to find from the Royal Zoological Society. And the rate of extinction of species, and this is large mammal species, the ones we're very good at counting, has declined rapidly since the 1980s. Now, but if it hadn't, we'd all be dead. Not just us, as one of those large mammal species, but all the others, because our rate of extinction was so high. You know, the sixth mass extinction. It was partly so high because it was the small, rare things on little islands that we killed off first. Dodos, but lots of other things that we never knew. And because so many of the rare have been killed and there's less, and conservation effort has been incredible. I mean, conservationists will hate me saying this, you know, and they tend to be depressed about the state of the world. But we've had a big conservation movement that really, really works hard and has slowed down the rate of extinctions. But it's mainly because it was the most frail and nearest to extinction species that went. But it has gone down. We're also getting new species. We always were, of course. But climate change appears, as far as I know from reading, this is not my area, to have potentially accelerated the development of new species. It's not a but it is just interesting to note it's happening. We're still dredging the oceans at a terrible rate. We're still cutting down the forests. But we are reintroducing species into Europe or seeing them back that we haven't. It's going to be great watching the farmers get upset about beavers. It sounds a bit unfair. I'm sure if I was a farmer, I'd be horrified to watch half my land being... but I don't know. I see... Well, it's who I move. I see more efforts at rewilding now than people talking about it in the past. I see successful rewilding in lots of bits of Europe with rivers actually being changed. I see schemes here. We didn't manage to get the big one in Wales, which would make complete sense. The top of the mountain range in Wales is just sheep and destitute. And down to the sea, it should be rewilded. But that's me as English saying it. It needs somebody who's Welsh pushing for that.
Can I interject on the infectious diseases? Because I happened to have a conversation with the man that runs the Morden Institute. No one in the room connected with them, are there? No. Just wanted to check there wasn't more of an expert on this before I said what I was going to say. And we were talking about blue tongue, which I hadn't been paying attention to. Yeah. Now, I didn't realise at the time that a lot of England and Wales was locked down from movement of animals for blue tongue, and that for the first time ever it was edging up the country at a very fast rate. And he was like, when I was doing my training 25, 30 years ago, he said, we just wouldn't have seen that in this country. But that means the animals end up infertile. Yeah. So you could have a massive change of diet enforced by the fact you've got, animals that no longer can have babies. Sorry, to take you on a different tack, but that evidence of climate change we're ignoring.
No, we're not. I don't think we are. We're really, really good at constantly worrying about climate change and species and more ticks, getting that. I've forgotten what the illness is you get with ticks. Lyme disease. Spotting the mosquitoes coming in, worrying about hornets. We're good at this. We don't step back. So diseases, a really simple one. You'll often hear people say climate change is going to mean that we're going to get more pandemics. Now you can measure very easily the rate at which we've had pandemics. They're a relatively easy thing to measure because they kill lots of people, right? And new diseases. Now the peak for new diseases was probably between 1800 and 1900. Typhoid, cholera. Cholera wasn't always there in Europe. We had no idea what it was when it came. In Oxford, there was a professor who paid for people to stand at the top of towers and look for when lightning occurred without the sound of thunder, because the fear is that's what brought cholera. We had endless epidemics of endless diseases, most of which we worked out ways to control. Even flu pandemics have gone down dramatically. They've become more frequent. Autumn 1889 was the Russian flu. 1918 was probably the same flu, which was the big one. 50 million dead around the world, probably one in the 30s that we never recorded. 1957, flu pandemic, at exactly the same time as Macmillan told people they'd never had it so good. There was a flu pandemic. 1968, when our parents both got it and were bedbound for a week in 68. Some of you may have been bedbound. Came back in 1970. 1977 may have been a Russian lab release. But each time we got them, the effects of the flu on the older people became less because they'd been infected before from H1N1. And if you remember the Tamiflu, was it 2010? That big scare about it, and it came in actually tiny. AIDS was a new pandemic, and of course COVID-19. But remarkably few pandemics in the last 100 years worldwide, despite so many more people in so much proximity to each other, and so many flying around the world in tubes with 400 people. Really good way of mixing, right? It's just perfect way of. So when you're told that we're going to get more diseases because we've got more population or more, we're actually getting less. Now, maybe because so few of us are near to animals anymore. And we may not know, but we can at least stop people telling us that we've been getting more and more diseases at a time when we're getting less and less of them. And that's, it's my one little trick I can do is just adding up numbers and checking with people and saying, have I missed something here? And of course, everybody wants to advocate for their thing. They want to say that their thing is really important. There was a lovely program that the Centre for Disease Control did, trying to work out how many people in the world were dying of each cause of disease, to stop people who were interested in heart disease overestimating the burden of heart disease, to stop people. And of course, all these diseases are terrible. You want to get funding to try to stop them. But you do need people to actually say, what is it that we're dying of? What is going down and what is going up? What should we worry about?
Okay, next question. There's one there, and then I've got to come over to this side of the room and I'll come back over here.
You touched on earlier about the low fertility rates, and also even earlier in your presentation, you talked about young students in your area thinking it's game over with respect to climate change. Do you see there going to be a link that those young people might think that it's not worth having children because there is no future?
Yeah.
And therefore, what do you think are the consequences both in terms of low fertility itself and other causes, including cost of living issues as well?
Yeah.
We are really going to have very low fertility, perhaps to the level of South Korea.
Yeah. It's fascinating. This is something that fascinates, partly because, of course, it's very, very easily counted. But a lot of problems, a lot of these things are that they're hard to count. We're very good at counting babies. We've got much better since Bill and Melinda paid nurses to vaccinate people. It's a brilliant, if you want to look at philanthropy and what it can do good, vaccination program for infants worldwide is good use of money. But it also meant if a financial incentive to vaccinate babies, we actually found our records on babies became better. In fact, we may almost have got too many babies, like possibly more than were actually born. You often get stories of people saying, I'm not going to have children to save the planet. There are all kinds of reasons people don't have children. I think it's a bit like people, I don't think people really are staying up at night and thinking that extra child I'm going to have is going to be the one that's going to tip it. Or the way I put it, if people say that, is your child could be another Greta. If you really want to save the planet, and you were being mechanical about it, and you didn't mind childbirth, I'm a man, I know I shouldn't talk about this, but but if you really want to save the planet, you should be trying to have 6 or 8 children and bring them up to be Gretas of the future. That will do far more to get carbon down than anything else you could do, or even your own actions. But I'm sure nobody sits there going, I'm going to have lots of children to help save the planet. But logically, there's almost zero connection between population and carbon. Almost zero. Another graph in the book, well, I'm very proud of the graphs because it's really hard to get the graphs in. And they take more effort doing the graphs than the words. I've got a graph of pollution by the top 10%, the top 1%, the top 1% and 1% and so on. And you wouldn't believe the carbon pollution of the very richest. They go out of their way to spend their additional money on things that burn diesel. It's not just the private planes, and private planes are unbelievable. We have thousands. We have more private planes, I think, than China has. It's not that China doesn't have money, it just has a train system that works. Other European countries are cutting down the private planes and not letting people land them. Giant yachts in the Mediterranean. If you're trying to think of a way of polluting the planet, multiple houses that you're heating. The carbon pollution of the very poorest has gone down because we've managed to reduce the number of people having to use wood stoves. But our population our fertility is low. There's no sign it's going to go up. But it's low for really complicated reasons. The best form of contraceptive is, by the way, going to university. The most effective way. There was a point where the highest rate of abortion in this country was in Surrey, like the richest county, because you can't have a baby when you're young if you're a richer person. But worldwide, we've got to a point where, for many people, the decision is for about a quarter it's none. Half of that quarter don't want children, half find they can't have them. The mode is now 1. The most common is 1. Highest is 2. Very, very rarely 3. It's a really interesting qualitative decision when you're deciding between 1 and 2. It's different to the past. And when they're in the future, I mean, how many people here are single children, haven't got a brother or sister? Put your hands up. Right, okay, tiny minority of you are single children. Right, for the youngsters, that's the norm. And it's much easier, I think, to be a single child than there are so many other single children. It's a key issue is in the past and always is will your children live? When my grandparents were born, 1 in 5 of the servant keeping classes, the poshest in this country, 1 in 5 of their children died before 5. There's a reason why we would have 3 or 4 or 5. Now you can have 1, and that 1 will almost certainly survive. It is now the norm in China for children to have 4 grandparents and their parents to have no siblings and they have no siblings. This is very, very new. It's not a fear yet because there are enough people very near us in a continent just below us to balance. And there's probably a little bit too many of them who are young for where they are, and there's too few for us. They just happen to have skin that's black. And we just happen to have a problem with skin that's black. Being trite about it. But it's an incredible thing, and it's a species-wide thing. It's almost as if we're like goldfish in a bowl, and we've suddenly decided that our concentration is so much. You know, people say people aren't having children because they can't afford to have children. Now, you have a baby, you can't go out. You can't spend money going out. Yes, disposable nappies cost a lot of money compared to the past, but actually it's not that expensive to have a child. Most of us would have shared bedrooms with a sibling when you were growing up. That was normal, whereas now it's not possible. It's not the affordability, it's something else. We also really, really behave like other people. So our behaviour is mirrored by what people around us do. And it's much easier not to have children when other people don't have children. Or just have 1 when other people have 1. And not to have a child until your 30s or mid-30s or late 30s if that's what other people are doing. Currently, our average age of childbirth in Europe and in this country is about 31 and a half, first child. And absolutely amazing. This is going up linearly, little bump in the pandemic. Fewer babies, not more, despite the fact that people were together. There's absolutely no dip in this average age of first child. And it's higher, it's older in Europe, mainland Europe. And obviously it's going to hit something. Right? And I'm sitting there just watching this going, at what point? At what point will it not carry on going up? there's also a massive change in relation between men and women going on, unbelievable one economically. So this fascinates me, and I haven't got the answers. I just think it's really, really important. And we should worry about people like Trump, who has an obsession about producing children himself, and the world producing enough for when he colonizes Mars with the white people, he can do that. And the fact that the richest man in the world has those kind of beliefs, really ought to warn us about how bad we can be. But there are things going on with fertility that have never happened in our species before, and we do not know what's going to happen. Tokyo, one-child norm. Barcelona's one-child norm.
Right. Question over here.
Thank you. You pointed out kind of really not great at statistics, particularly in modern Scotland. With your playwork at Hatton, have you got any exciting ways to teach American and
Do you remember Cuisenaire sticks? Those coloured sticks?
Yes.
There were all kinds of exciting ways. My friend is laughing at me because she used to take maths toys around to teach teachers in their 20s. I went to see you to teach maths teachers how to make maths fun. But the simplest thing is not to have these cut-off exams, particularly at 16. So there's been tests done across Europe about people's ability at maths at age 24, and it's fascinating. And we could do it with you now. You think you're all so good, and many of you will have an A in the old money. If you're older, you'll have a 1 or 2. And of course, the youngsters now have their 9s. We flipped it around and their 8s, right? So I could give you the GCSE maths paper from this year, and you'd almost all completely fail it. You wouldn't necessarily be that bad, but 24-year-olds fail it. 24-year-olds who get the equivalent of A and A stars, because we have an education system all geared up on getting most people a C. If you don't get a C, there are so many jobs you can't do. In the services, you have to be a firefighter. I embarrassed myself at the fire service college immensely by talking about getting C's in English and maths without realising until the fire people very kindly said to me, you do realise we're all firefighters because we didn't get C's in English and maths. Otherwise, we'd be police officers or nurses. We don't want to actually spend our lives fighting fires. It's a horrible job. But we have an education system that's geared up to try and get those children whose social circumstances, not ability, social circumstances means the highest thing they're likely to get a C on that day and never remember it again. Or to get, I'm very close to a lovely person, I won't mention who she is, not the one at the back, who got an A at GCSE maths, who doesn't know what a fraction is. But her very expensive school knew how to train the girls to get an A at GCSE maths with absolutely no idea of A equals B over C. None. Right? And this is a big problem. We come out bottom of Europe for our actual ability on these things, despite these very high scores that we give ourselves, because we train to test. Go on. How to make it interesting.
The terrible exercise that you suggested of putting everybody in income order, that would be a way of doing an on-road medium.
Yes.
And things that you wouldn't forget.
Yeah.
So I think something like that.
Especially the maximum minimum. You wouldn't forget that.
So I think physical ways of teaching.
We did that once with the Drop Dead show. Won a reward for Channel 4 for this show called the Drop Dead Show, with a very young presenter called Davina McCall, my first right. And we got the audience like you. We had 15 questions. What job did your father do? Do you smoke? And so on. One fun one about how often you have sex. And each one came with a score. And you start off with a number, and then we tell you what year you're going to die on the basis of this. And that's a way of teaching maths.
Fantastic. I'm just going to say I'm really aware of time. I'm also aware of my challenge that the Book Festival of FME, we need to end up somewhere positive. So just to bear that in mind, I'm going to leave a bit of time for positivity at the end. So get your questions in quick. I saw 3 in the middle here somewhere. So lady in the front row, and then the lady behind, and then the lady over there. Oh, and David, sorry, all of you. But we'll rattle through them, so I need quicker answers, Danny.
just wondering, when you understand the data more in something like 7 Children, and you've done all the work to identify the problem and ways to explain the numbers, does that get you closer to a solution? When you finished it, you say, here's the 3 things we need to do?
It gets me in my head closer to a solution, I believe, for myself, but I'm very aware there's just me. So I mean, one of the key things I did for 7 Children, or why I did it, is to show the methodology in the footnotes so somebody else can do it and check, and it can be done for other countries, and we can see. The shock or the giveaway for 7 Children is when you get to the 7th child, typical of the richest 7th for Britain in the middle, and you discover that her mum and dad run a corner shop and they can't quite afford to send her to a private school, and in fact she looks poor. They're just quite good at running the corner shop. So the key thing is realising that we don't live in a country of well off and not well off. We live in a country where almost everybody is what the upper middle class would think of as poor. 4 of their 7 children are poor, officially 3, but and the answers are just a little bit more money, and the money is really easy because it's so concentrated amongst the best off, people like me. You can tax us higher, which already happens in Scotland. We have an example country for the UK with a higher rate of tax, which has a system which gives parents of children who are poor more money. And we can actually monitor the effect and we can see what's happening. But I do books that partly surprised me. I didn't, I was shocked to work out not just what's happening at the bottom of the scale, but how your 7th child, with these 7 children are equally spaced across the income distribution, your 7th child is not like the child of most people who are going to read the book. And this is a Victorian trick. The Victorians played this when they wrote books about poverty. They did shock horror. The Victorians, upper middle class, discovered poverty in Victorian England. It wasn't obvious to them. Charles Booth had to do a survey. He thought it was low. He did a survey to beat a friend in a bet and then found out the opposite. Dickens was a revelation because he was telling people things that weren't. This was the richest country on earth at its height, and this discovery of what was going on. And in a way, this is, it's very sad. We have to do it again. It's very sad we've become that unequal.
Yeah. David.
Can I just go back to your topic of immigration? It's really a question about how you reframe this topic. For a lot of people, not a lot of people, for some people, like we see recently, I think, even in Scotland, in Malta, immigration is a big crisis. But that's not just true here, that's also true, for example, Germany, where you talk about the population and they've had a demographic crisis for quite some time. In Turingen, they've got a huge depopulation issue. Actually, they have the most toxic brand of far-right politics, the AFD, and Scotland was particularly vicious for them. So how do we reframe this? Reframe this issue in terms of actually requiring people in order to solve the demographic crisis?
I
think so. Just finish. Particularly when it's being framed everywhere by the political, a lot of people in the political class as by alternative facts.
Yeah, I think you take it head on, although it's very hard. There's a trend amongst white, posh London people to say, I understand the working class, I can understand why. I think you just go, this is racism. It's a false depiction of working class people that they're racist. It's stirred up by posh Mayfair people of the same kind of Oswald Mosley that we have again. It's orchestrated. People every day are not worried about the fact that down the road there's a shabby hotel which is housing people. They never knew. It requires actually telling them that that's where those people are and trying to convince them that these poor souls are some kind of danger and you need to burn them to death. And we've always been humans who can be cajoled to burn people to death. That's what pogroms in Russia were about burning Jewish people to death, right? And we're just as capable of doing it now. But there's no reason to give any solace to the idea that it's okay to burn people to death. And it's racism, and I've seen it all my life, and you just call it out. And there were a set of academics who are making a career out of trying to claim to be working class heroes who represent the working class. And you just go, you're racist. And although you should be kind, invariably when they say that they come from this particular background, they went to a grammar school and they went to a very posh area. And you could get personal about it, but you shouldn't. But this is racism, and there's no place for it at all. And it's racism being orchestrated by rich people who are funding reform and so on in their interests for what they want to get, who are married to Germans.
Right, I have two questions I want to take together there and then come to the lady at the end there.
This is taking us back a bit, but we haven't mentioned dementia. And with a world population that is living older, is that not a disease that's not contagious, but it's very real?
Okay, and can we take the question next to at the same time?
Yeah, I went to a book festival years ago, and the book was The Spirit Level. It changed my worldview, and I thought inequality is a problem for everybody. You know, the rich people benefit from more equal countries. You know, everybody's better off in a more equal country. And we've been banging on about it for years and years, and equality is a problem. As I got older, I asked myself the question, why is it persistent? Why, if that's the obvious way to go, more egalitarian societies, why is it not happening? And you can see that there's a small number, maybe genetically programmed people who are greedy, selfish, believe in competition, meritocracy and all the rest of it, who have captured the agenda and are getting richer and richer, and making it more and more unequal. And I think we're stuck with it. I can't see any way out of it. It's human nature.
Okay, do this quickly. There wasn't just one period where we brought inequality down in rich countries. There were periods before. So Piketty says there was one, but I think you can look back and say, but certainly there is a characteristics of human beings where some of us are much more greedy than others. It's not many. It may possibly be genetic. It may be there's genes that people think are the ones for IQ are actually genes for greed. And you're more likely to get rich, you're more likely to send your kids to a school where they get high marks, and you think, oh, that's because they're clever, right? And it may always be with us that some of us are more greedy. And there may be an ecological reason why. You know, in the past, it helped if some people stored grain to try to make a profit, because occasionally you got a famine, and those people were useful. But we all didn't like them most of the time. But we have to work out. Traits don't stay in human beings unless there is an advantage, even nasty traits like that. But there's no reason why we should genetically be stupid, some of us.
And dementia?
Dementia is definitely going to rise. It's interesting that we call it, that we put it down as a cause of death. So Alzheimer's and dementia is a cause of death that we put down. I wish we wouldn't, because people don't actually die of dementia or Alzheimer's, they die of something else. And we are going to have to work out how to live with it. I think it's Oliver James, do you remember the psychologist who wrote Affluenza? He wrote a lovely book, I think, about his mother-in-law who got dementia, where he was self-discovering that rather than argue, what you do not do is argue with somebody with dementia. It's pointless and pointless for you. When she wanted to leave the house, he would just go out with her and they would walk around the house, all the way around, detached house, and back in again. And we're going to have to work out how to deal with this. I will probably get it. Enough people in my family have had it. It's fine for me. The key thing is don't worry anymore when you've got dementia, because you can't remember. The key thing is it going to ruin the life of somebody else looking after me? And it's thinking about those kind of things. But also back to inequality. If we carry on becoming more and more unequal, those of us who are affluent are going to spend our last year alive, because we're not going to die in a quick, nice heart attack. We're going to spend our last life being looked after by some poor person whose life is so awful in a bed. We're condemning ourselves to pain. This is stupid. But I wish we wouldn't put it down as a cause of death, because the cause is finally getting an infection. It's a fall. It's something else. It's a heart attack.
The lady there.
I wanted to go back to the more or less problem and ask you about what I think is there's a narrower metric that one hears every so often, which is the ratios between the highest paid person in an organisation, usually commercial but not always, and the lowest paid person in the organisation. That's quite good. Could you say something about that?
Yeah, but the High Pay Centre released these. For CEOs, FTSE CEOs, I think it's about, they get 350, 400 times. And you used to get 100. The nice thing about getting a minimum wage is that we now know what the lowest person at least is. What's fascinating to me is that they came down in 2018-19. They then went up a little bit. They came down under government instruction during the pandemic by a Conservative government who told CEOs, we can't fund furlough and stop 4 million unemployment happening, and you take increases in your salaries while we're doing this. But then went up. They've gone down most recently. I think it really matters to keep an eye on top. University vice chancellors have kind of gone flat at least. If you want to be pop, it's odd. The CEO, the average CEO is about 4.3 million a year. A friend of mine called Bill spent ages looking into this and how long they are CEOs. You might think, why they want 4.3 million? It takes a career to get to be a CEO. You might only be a CEO for 2, 4, 6 years. It's often very short. You've spent your life stepping on other people's necks and being quite nasty, actually, to get to that point and being unfair to any CEOs in the audience. 4 million for a couple of years, that's 8. It's only half after paying your tax, even with some avoidance schemes. That allows you to free your family as far as you're concerned from anything, and a wealth that will then carry on forever in trust funds and family wealth. You can see what they're trying to do and why they're trying to float it. It's a huge waste of money, and it means we get people at the top who are very bad and not good at their job. Because you should be a university vice chancellor because you really care about university, not because you want 200, 300 or 400,000 a year. And you should want to be in upper management. You should be running a school because you really care about the school. And okay, it's fine to be paid 10 grand more than your colleagues or 20, but not an academy trust where suddenly you can afford to send your children to the exclusive private school while you run the state school for the little people. Because that's what ends up with these top salaries. You end up getting worse people, the greedy people end up being put up there, and they make bad decisions and do bad things, and it's almost not their fault because their innate greediness.
We're in a city where there's just been a play called Make It Happen, which explores the rise and the fall of Fred Goodwin. I don't know if anyone else saw that, but the little old lady from Morningside that continually asked the question every year at the AGM about salary ratios had a big impact. There was a review I read in one of the mainstream media papers, and it said it praised the thing that said they didn't like the ending because there was no remorse. I think they missed the point. There was no remorse. I'm aware we've only got 10 minutes left. I know.
I think that the chief executive of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway, this is trillions, I think they want 200 grand a year.
Yeah. So I know I've got lots more hands. I've got 10 minutes. I want to finish somewhere positive, and I know one of those people looking at me with their hands up is Fiona from Save the Children, and you've got an amazing project at the moment, which I think is unpicking somewhere, because one of the things you say in the book is we know the solutions. So Fiona, do you want to say what it is you want to say, or ask a question that you had your hand up for?
Oh, I am mindful of trying to be hopeful, but the slivers of hope, I'm finding it really fascinating, and I'm happy to think about some things and call them for what they are, particularly racism. I won't say the children obviously global, but my bit of the puzzle is challenging child poverty here in Scotland. And in terms of that hope exercise, we've been doing a project with Joseph Rowntree Foundation looking at public attitudes. There's a narrative that Scotland's more progressive than some other parts of the UK, and we've sort of tested that and dug into it. And there is cause for hope. People in Scotland recognise the challenges and really care about child poverty, but I suppose picking up all the threads around
data inaccuracy, to be benevolent, or deliberate misuse of data, and the framing comments that you've said. We're fighting a sort of avalanche from the other side, if you like, and we don't have time or opportunity to put you in a room with everyone in Scotland and bring them on board and explain the data. So our research is showing people really care, but that we need to, as a sector and as a society who really care about this stuff, is frame the problem better and explain through stories why it all matters. And we do know the solutions, and you said it, income, like the Scottish Travelling in Scotland is making a difference. It's driving down child poverty, which, as the gentleman said, makes us all richer as a society, and it's about a better Scotland on a human level. We know it's making things better for children, but how do we hold on to that progress when we're fighting against this sort of lurch to the right? And when we talked about these concentrations of power in certain pockets, and the elite, the political elite, the media elite, what are the tools, or from your 59 books, how do we hold on to the progress? Tell us, Danny.
I don't know. It's easy to get despondent. So the book ends on solutions, and some solutions are very old, 200, 300, 400 years old, and these are left wing, not being nice, and so on. We almost always forget the nasty people. So, Roundtree Foundation. Joseph watched his dad set up soup kitchens in York, saw it as a failure in the 1850s, set up the foundation of his name, and managed through the work of his son, who advised Beveridge, to get to a situation where we needed no soup kitchens anymore. And that's a rich man at a rich time. And we remember Joseph Rowntree, and we remember Seaborn Rowntree, and remember Beveridge. We completely forget all the committees trying to stop any of that happening. And the main report on the poor law saying it was a good thing and we should keep it. And the people who wanted to keep workhouses after 1948, they didn't go till 1948, right? And we forget you're always up against, and they were up against them in the past. And so it's not easy. If you want to know why is the problem still there, it's because of the nasty people and not enough working together on the progressive side. So other European countries have been better at being left-wing. And our left-wing is pretty awful and shattered, but I think that's related to us having an empire, which is, well, I won't go on that. And then some things are more new and weren't known for centuries. So words like racism, racialism, the whole series of words actually entered the dictionary in the 60s. Those nice socialists 100 years ago were eugenicists and often racists. Yeah. And there'll be things that I believe that probably already, because I'm old, but certainly in 40, 50 years' time, people will be saying, can you believe that he actually thought this? And, so we've got to be open to that. But it's a continual long fight. The solutions aren't going to be somebody produces a book and chapter 8, it's always the last chapter, has the solutions. There's been a political move for centuries to try to be nicer to each other and curtail power. And sometimes, in some places, it works. Some of the best examples in the world ever are in operation right now in Europe. Lowest rates of poverty and inequality ever measured, best health ever measured. There are now 15 countries of Europe who have income inequalities at the Scandinavian level. Majority of Europe is at that point. People will hate me saying this in places like Germany and France. And we should see the successes. Or when somebody like Trump comes along for the second time, watching the effects on elections in other countries when people who are toying with voting for somebody like Trump in their country can look at the US and go, no. And that's happened in Australia and so on. So accounting for the good news. And we happen to be unlucky in the UK in that we have one of the worst records on this continent, and we followed the USA model. And people like Gordon Brown went to the USA every summer on holiday to learn how to do things, right? It was the wrong place to go. And we should recognise that was a mistake that we made. There's enormous amount of advocacy from the young. They do think we got it wrong. They think we're getting it wrong, not just on climate, but on international policy. The young think we're completely wrong. The young in 1945 had been sent to fight in 2 world wars which could both be avoided. and for a whole generation they didn't respect the old. I think there's a chance we may get that again, but we need them not to blame themselves for the position that they're in and think if they just worked harder they could get that nice job. But I really would be optimistic about it, but it requires not getting too despondent about the situation we're in. The fact that Scotland has some of the most radical policies on child poverty in Europe is unbelievable. It's an incredible achievement. And it's fine to say it's not good enough, but the fact it even happened here, in this place, in England, I describe the Scottish policies. I don't say it's Scotland. And I ask audiences to guess which part of Europe did this. And on average, they have to go through more than 10 countries, right? Before they realise that this payment to children occurred here. And we're now beginning to get the evidence of the effect of the payment. Yeah, so we should at least celebrate it. It's remarkable. And it's also remarkable that still Labour and the SNP have got an agreement not to argue about it, I hope.
Well, I've got 2 minutes, 36 seconds, it's saying on this clock here. There's a quote in the book that I'd quite like to finish with, which, sorry we didn't get to your question, but you can grab Danny afterwards with it. Solutions take decades, if not generations. It is absolutely vital to be angry and impatient, but if we overestimate how fast change can happen, we need to address the bad things much more systematically and quicker. And I think your book and Unpicking the Data helps us do that, to make sure that we're not distracted by things like perhaps all the headlines on immigration, when actually they relate much more closely to poverty and inequality than most people's lives realise. So sadly, I've got to draw this to a close. Danny will be signing books at the table. For those of you that had your questions up, I'm really sorry we didn't get to them. I want us to leave here optimistic and happy that there is a book that brings all this together and that can really help us think deeply about the questions to be asked and to not be drawn into magic tricks of distraction, so that we can really focus on the things that matter. Please remember this conversation was brought to you by the Edinburgh International Book Festival, which is a charity. If you'd like to find out more about them, there is information on the website. And I'd like to thank you all for your time and your listening today, but also all the questions. And sorry if we didn't get to you. Have a safe journey home, and we hope to see you again soon.